This is CNN Money Switzerland, and these are your coronavirus news updates. I'm Ana Maria Montero. Coming up on the program, when medical equipment is scarce, who has priority and who does not? We speak to the president of the Swiss Society for Intensive Care Medicine, who is in quarantine himself. And we meet the tech startup looking for coronavirus survivors to develop a treatment for those not covered by a future vaccine. And as the airline industry goes deeper into difficult territory, the CEO of Geneva Airport tells us what he thinks about the possible nationalization of Swiss owner Lufthansa. All this on a day that sees Swiss cases of the virus reach over 8,000. First, there was a shortage of masks, then hand sanitizer. Now there are fewer beds, and ventilators are increasingly becoming a rare commodity. In the fight against coronavirus, frontline medicine is the new battleground. Every day, medical staff face tough decisions about who gets access and who does not. Tanja Koenig spoke to the president of the Swiss Society of Intensive Medicine, and she started by asking him basically how he was, as he now is also infected by COVID-19.
Thank you. Hello, I'm doing fine. In fact, I'm at home, I'm in quarantine, but I feel well. Because maybe you know that many people who are infected, they don't have any severe symptoms. And luckily, until now, I don't have any severe symptoms and I feel well.
So you're just keeping isolated. That's good. Glad that you're able to join us. According to your latest press release, Switzerland has about 850 beds with ventilators. And at the moment, we have over 8,000 COVID-19 cases in Switzerland and more counting. So I wonder, not everyone needs a ventilator, as we can see. Nevertheless, are there enough?
We are scaling up. I mean, many of the hospitals are trying to scale up their capacities in ICU beds and ventilators. There's been a great effort around the country, and we have now more places than this number, probably over 1,000. And as you know, as you mentioned, only a little part of the patient need a ventilator. This is around 5 to 10%. So at the moment, we have enough ICU ventilated beds, but we don't know exactly how the things are going to evolve in the next days. But we are getting prepared to face it.
So you mentioned that you're getting prepared. Recently, you also released some guidelines together with the Swiss Academy for Medical Sciences on how to proceed when there's not enough or there should be a shortage of these ICU beds. If so, how medical personnel shall be advised or how they should prioritize. What's your advice to them?
Yeah, we try to be prepared to this because we hope it will not come, but if we have a surge of patients and that our ICU capacity is overwhelmed, we want to be ready. And we want our physicians and teams in the ICUs around the country to have a kind of toolbox just to be ready to make this decision in triage. We have been working with the Swiss Academy for Science, and all the ethical parts have been worked by the experts in the field. And we've been adding the criteria for the medical reasons to admit or not to admit a patient. Mm-hmm. And so we try to give some counsel, some advice, to the physician and to the teams to make this difficult choice if they were to be confronted in the next days.
Okay. Let's say if there is a complete overload of capacities for intensive care units and ventilators and patients have to be refused, what's the criteria?
So the main criteria are, first of all, that we have to take into consideration the advanced plan of the patient. That is very important. If someone has decided not to go to an ICU, this is very important to take this into account. Second, all the ethics principles that were already published years ago by the Swiss Academy of Science are still the basis for the decision. Third, we have to decide on the prognosis of the patient. We have to choose the patients who have the best prognosis and will get the best out of the ICU stay. And this is a difficult choice, and it's not always only based on the comorbidities or the frailty index or the other problems that the patient may have. It's a difficult task for the physician, and that's why we publish these guidelines. And I hope that my colleagues who will be confronted in the next days or week, they will be able to use these guidelines.
Thank you very much. And just quickly, what about you? When do you think can you get off quarantine?
It's 10 days and at least 2 days without symptoms. And just now I don't have a lot of symptoms, and I will be okay for going back home, not home, going back to work, on Friday morning.
Okay, great. Then good luck with that, and thank you so much for joining us.
The world waits for a vaccine, but even when it arrives, not everyone will benefit. Those with weak immune systems, such as the elderly, and those with HIV may not even be eligible. Cue Memo, a biotech firm looking for blood samples from recovered COVID-19 patients in an effort to develop a treatment for these people. Olivia Cheng spoke to their CEO to find out how many have come forward so far.
So far, we have already offers of roughly 100 corona patients that have overcome the infections, and several others who are still suffering a lot, that they would be willing to donate blood, and that we can then generate a highly efficient neutralizing antibody derived from their blood.
So in very basic terms, how does that actually work, and what can you actually take away from these blood samples that could help coronavirus in the long term?
We typically get 100,000 different antibodies from one patient, and from these 100,000 antibodies, we can then sort down identify the antibody which is highly neutralizing against the virus and has helped the patient to overcome the infection. And given that we screen a lot of patients, we then can also see which patient has the best antibody profile. So we basically take from 10 to even more, a million of different antibodies. We identify the antibody really doing the job, and that we would like to develop as a therapy.
So if I could put it into very basic terms, your goal essentially is to find these very rare antibodies or protein molecules that have actually cleared the coronavirus and then turn it into some sort of treatment.
You got it.
When could we see that in terms of a time frame? Are we talking months or years then?
You are right. What we can deliver is that we will have a therapeutic candidate roughly in 6 months. Mm-hmm. And that therapeutic candidate then has to be developed preclinically and clinically. And this will take rather years than months. It's so far not really clear how the regulatory authorities will react on this crisis, because, I mean, it's clear that if all standards have to be met, that this process will last 3-4 years. But I'm quite optimistic that given the situation that the regulatory authorities will also try to implement shortcuts, making that development speedier.
How large of a library of blood samples would you need to make this work?
We would like to have a library of at least 100 patients who are eligible. As I said, we just have 100, so that is not enough to really have solid blood sample in the lab. I think we are targeting roughly 500, and with 500 we would be sure that in the end we would have at least 100 samples in the lab.
As we speak, vaccine trials are also going ahead. Other treatments are in talks. How does what you're proposing differ to what we're hearing and seeing being talked about?
What we do is a therapy, and I think it's worthwhile to have one, since, I mean, not everybody will get vaccinated. We will have acute patients that will need a therapy directly and not a vaccination, because a vaccination obviously works a couple of weeks later. Also in immunocompromised patients, such as HIV patients or elderly people with a weak immune system, the vaccination might not work optimally, and therefore also a therapeutic approach is advisable.
Switzerland is, of course, also a pharma country. We're home to companies like Roche and Novartis. How do you see this antibody expertise that you have potentially coming into play with large pharmaceuticals?
Actually, we now have we are in a very narrow space, since antiviral antibodies, not a lot of companies produce that. Novartis just stepped out of the infectious diseases. Roche has only a small program in antibacterials. I think we are in a niche there. The niche now gets a lot of attention, and I guess once we have a development candidate, that would be the point in time where we already might be able to start to talk even to these two pharma companies. Latest when we have positive phase 2 data, then clearly the interest of large pharma company will increase dramatically.
Still to come, the 30-minute coronavirus test that could help contain the coronavirus spread. But first, a look at some of the other headlines this Monday. The number of people diagnosed with COVID-19 in Switzerland almost doubled over the weekend. At least 8,060 people in Switzerland and Liechtenstein have now tested positive for the virus. At least 66 people have died. Demand for wage subsidies is soaring as measures affect many small businesses. Some 21,000 companies comprising 315,000 employees have applied for short-time work this month, according to the State Secretariat for Economic Affairs, who says that's about 4 times the number at the peak of the 2009 global financial crisis. And the canton of Ticino is defying federal counsel and stopping industrial production to try and contain the virus. The Federal Council ruled that cantons cannot make this kind of lockdown decision, but Ticino is maintaining its stance. Meanwhile, global markets took another beating to the start of the week. European plane maker Airbus, which announced measures this morning to shore up its balance sheet, has also taken a hit as the pandemic brings the travel industry to a halt. The company said it has secured a $15 billion credit facility and also said it has dropped 2020 guidance and scrapped its dividend. We're joined now by Andre Schneider. Organizers of the Tokyo Olympics have started drawing up alternative plans to holding the Games this summer. In a press statement last night, the IOC said cancellation was not on the agenda. But already several countries, including Canada and Australia, have withdrawn from the Games. Here's Matt Layton with a quick update.
Today is going to be a key day in the Olympic movement. Yesterday, Thomas Bach wrote a letter to the athletes saying, "We are considering all options. We realize it's incredibly difficult, but just to postpone the Olympics for a year has enormous implications and complexities. Millions of hotel nights, there's all the TV deals, there's all the fitting around other events, there's keeping the movement going for an extra year, but that's on the agenda." Overnight, Canada came out and said, we're effectively not going to send our athletes. Australia said the same. There has been similar movements from Brazil, from Norway, from Slovenia. Shinzo Abe, who is the Prime Minister of Japan, a few hours ago, he addressed the Japanese Parliament. And for the first time, he said, yes, there's a possibility of postponement. So there's going to be an awful lot of behind closed doors meetings in the next couple of days. And it really is a shift of power. Before that, the IOC was seen as the all-conquering, we make the rules and you go for it. And then in the last couple of days, I suppose, with the Americans, the track athletes and the swimmers saying, we don't really like this. A lot of independent athletes. One IOC member came out and said, no, this is not correct. Lord Coe from the World Athletics also wrote a letter to Thomas Bach saying, we don't think this is going to go ahead in the right timing. So really a lot of pressure is going to be going on. What are the options? They're saying that cancellation is not on the table at the moment. However, it's going to be very difficult to fit it into the timescale. I suppose the betting at the moment is for 2021. There would be a theory that you could throw it to the end of this year, but with coronavirus, you never know what's going to happen. So much changing, and I suspect a lot will change even in the next 24 hours.
As the virus spreads, so do travel restrictions and subsequent groundings by different airlines. We caught up today with the CEO of Geneva Airport to find out how they are being affected and how he's looking at the new possible nationalization of Lufthansa. We're joined now by Andre Schneider. He's CEO of Geneva Airport. Thank you so much for being with us. Okay, EasyJet is by far the major airline at the Geneva Airport, with a market share of 44.8%. I mean, the news of this grounding, how does this impact the airport?
Actually, it's quite consistent with all airlines, where you can see that they're all, given the very low level of passengers, grounding big parts of their fleet. So currently we're at minus 90% of passengers. So it is just within the normal procedures we're now seeing from all airlines.
But I mean, are you losing sleep over this? I mean, it's almost half of the market share for you at the airport.
I mean, given that this is the case for all airlines, we are naturally concerned because an airport has a very high level of fixed costs. So we're currently working on reducing our overall costs during this phase. But this is just within all airlines. So somewhere it's just a continuation, which we've seen also with all the restrictions to enter in other countries or even to come to Switzerland. There is less and less passengers eligible to actually take a plane. So we will have to see for the coming weeks to be at a very, very low rate of passengers, as I said, minus 90% or whatever.
And how, you've mentioned earlier, you're having to deal with the fixed costs and managing these costs. How are you doing this? Are you reducing airport staff? Are you cutting jobs? How are you working?
We are actually at the moment introducing a unemployment program like it is offered by the Swiss state, which allows to put people on a temporary unemployment whilst they maintain their jobs and they get their salaries. And so we're currently working on the operational planning, how many people we need, because grounding does mean that we have less passengers, but we have much more work to actually now park those planes. We still have to maintain operations for the last passengers coming by. So we're currently working on that one, and we will try to reduce as much as possible the people working at the airport and also the work to be done, and actually put them on this temporary unemployment plan.
So is there any danger that the Geneva Airport could close completely?
This is not our decision. This is actually a decision of our regulator and the federal government. I believe we will maintain to be open because we have still sanitary flights. We have incoming freight, which is very important. We also do need still to accommodate the last flights. So fulfilling this kind of public interest task, we will not, from our side, decide to close. But it's naturally not to be excluded that the Swiss state might decide this way.
All right, and what about your cash flow situation at the moment? How are you managing this?
We are already deploying the partial unemployment program, which is offered by the Swiss state. And yes, we are in discussion throughout the whole Swiss air industry with the Swiss government on what can be done to actually help the overall system, not only the airports, but also the airlines active here in Switzerland, and also the different other companies like ground handling, like freighters, and so on, to actually get the support to be ready to redeploy their services when we are getting out of the crisis, because we are an important part to the Swiss economy and to the support of the exporting companies in Switzerland.
And as we look at the second most important airline for the Geneva Airport is, of course, Swiss, 14% of the market share. There are discussions now in Germany about nationalizing Lufthansa, which, of course, owns Swiss. What do you think the impact of this could be, and how do you feel about the future of Swiss?
I think it will be important to ensure that the Swiss, as an important airline for the hub in Zurich, but also for our European traffic in Geneva, is maintained in its presence in Switzerland and also in its understanding of Swiss needs. So we certainly will follow that with much interest. But on the other side, we have, beyond EasyJet and Swiss, many other international airlines, non-Swiss airlines, which are working from our platform, and that works really well.
Well, how do you feel about it? Should Switzerland jump back in and try to reacquire Swiss Airlines?
I think the Swiss state has to make sure that the Swiss aviation infrastructure is maintained and is ready to help or to support Swiss economy, but also Swiss people after the crisis. How this exactly has to be formulated by whom or by which state, I think that can be decided on a case-by-case basis. I just want to remind, Geneva has lost in the 90s all its intercontinental connections due to the withdrawal of Swissair, and today we have recreated an important amount of those relations due to foreign airlines. So I think at the end it's about the offer, not only about the airline who does it.
You're a man on a mission when it comes to sustainability. We've seen a drop in air pollution and emissions in the last few weeks. How will this impact the climate change conversation moving forward?
I don't think that it will change a lot. I mean, this is an intermediate phase where we are in a special crisis, but the question will come back as soon as we get out of this crisis to how to make aviation more sustainable, because it's necessary to support this globalized world and also especially countries which are very much concentrated on export like Switzerland.
And I know you've had discussions about using renewable energy at the airport, biofuel, et cetera. Now with low oil prices, do you find like this will undermine the fight for renewable energies?
We do hope not. We are working in view of possible new ticket taxes in Switzerland to actually have some of this money to support the introduction of biofuel.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time, Mr. Schneider. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Testing shortages are being reported across the world. In the meantime, in the UK, Oxford scientists are developing a test that gives results in 30 minutes. CNN's Nick Patton-Walsh has more.
Test, 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 says the WHO, but it can take days in a lab. Yet in Oxford, England, they think they've made a pregnancy-style colour-based test usable anywhere, the raw materials for which cost about $25.
Now, this isn't a hospital, of course, and these are not sterile, but the hope is you'll be able to take a specimen from someone's nose, put it in a test tube, and then get it tested in just about half an hour.
At Oxford University, they can't test me, as it could contaminate their laboratory, but they work on a negative and positive control sample and had a head start 6 weeks ago with help from partner academics in China. Here, he adds a positive control sample to their special mix of chemicals and enzymes before a colleague steps in to stop cross-contamination.
I have done the positive, and she's doing a negative in the second tubes.
She puts it into a machine that heats both samples to 65 degrees centigrade or 150 Fahrenheit for 30 minutes. Then it's done. Pink is good, yellow is bad.
There's a race against time here too. They need clinical trials for about a week, then regulatory approval to be swift, and then mass production in clean facilities. They hope, though, that may all be possible within 2 to 4 weeks.
Nothing works until it works, and there could be shortfalls here. But there's another bonus as well.
For now, we are trying to push it that everything needs to be handled by the professional people in the hospital, but we are doing it, like doing some more development to hopefully that we can have an easy kit that people can use it at home.
The test needs a temperature anyone can create with water at home.
So 1 part cold, 2 parts boiling hot.
Exactly. And then we just pop the test in and put the lid on.
There are kits that claim to be faster, but this is simple and could be used anywhere for even less than $25 if mass-produced. Possible, cheap, quick clarity at a time when uncertainty rules. Nick Patton-Walsh, CNN, Oxford.
A reminder now of the main news headlines today. The number of people diagnosed with COVID-19 in Switzerland almost doubled over the weekend. At least 8,060 people in Switzerland and Liechtenstein have now tested positive for the virus. At least 66 people have died. Meanwhile, demand for wage subsidies is soaring as closures and other containment measures affect many small businesses. The State Secretariat for Economic Affairs say demand is about 4 times that at the peak of the 2009 global financial crisis. And the canton of Ticino is defying the Federal Council this Monday and ordered all non-essential industry to shut down to try and contain the virus. The Federal Council ruled that cantons cannot make this kind of lockdown decision. but Ticino is standing its ground. All right, you can find all our special coverage on our newly launched video platform, cnnmoney-coronavirus.ch, where information will be streamed throughout the day to keep you informed. And of course, you can always check in with our social media pages on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And whatever the comment, it's always great to hear from you. Remember, stay at home if you can, keep your distance, and wash those hands. And watch anything that you would like on cnnmoney.ch. That is the website. We'll see you tomorrow.